Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start out with our feature, the 3 Mile Island Nuclear Power Plant. It's located on 3 Mile Island on the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania, just south of the capital, Harrisburg. It opened in 1974 and it will be closing in 2019 at the age of 45. In March of 1979, it was the scene of the worst nuclear power plant accident in American history, and although the plant was reopened after the accident, the company that owns the plant, Exxon, has announced they're going to close it in the next 2 years. Here is the first ABC News report on March 28, 1979, with Frank Reynolds, Max Robinson, and Bettina Gregory describing the accident at 3 Mile Island.
For many years, there has been a vigorous debate in this country about the safety of the nation's 72 nuclear energy power plants. That debate is likely to be intensified because of what happened early this morning at a nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania. Max?
Frank, it was an accident at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant, which is located on an island in the Susquehanna River, 10 miles from Harrisburg. A cooling pump broke down, and the plant did just what it was supposed to do, shut itself off, but not before some radioactivity had escaped.
It happened at the number 2 generator about 4 o'clock this morning. Something caused the secondary cooling system to fail. It shut off the reactor, but heat and pressure built up, and some radioactive steam escaped into the building housing the reactor, and eventually out into the plant and the air. Workers were evacuated. The plant was completely shut down. A crew from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission rushed from Washington and sped around all day testing for radiation. Workers in their cars were checked and rechecked for radiation. Some was found. Late today in Washington, the NRC said, quote, "There's a hell of a lot of radiation in the reactor building," adding that radiation had penetrated the 4-foot-thick walls of that building and was detected as far as 1 mile away. Officials of Metropolitan Edison conceded some workers may have been contaminated, but they insisted this was not a serious accident. They said only 1/10 the amount of radiation needed for a general alarm escaped. Why, then, was a general alarm sounded and not until 3 hours later? Company officials said just to be safe. But state officials were upset that they weren't told of the accident earlier.
If there is a situation where there was a perception of an emergency and the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency and Council were not notified, we intend to find that out. That would be extremely disturbing. We will make a thorough investigation into that.
Officials say they still don't know what caused the malfunction that triggered the general alarm. They say the only thing they're certain of is that there'll be an investigation and that this nuclear power plant won't reopen until they're sure it's safe. Bettina Gregory, ABC News, 3 Mile Island near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Well, it was pretty scary at the time, especially with the movie The China Syndrome playing across the country. I remember I was driving near Harrisburg a couple of days after that. But as it turned out, there were very few radiation effects that could be documented. Here is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission historian to explain exactly what happened and the aftermath of 3 Mile Island.
On March 28, 1979, the United States suffered its most serious commercial nuclear power plant accident at the 3 Mile Island facility near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The accident started around 4 o'clock in the morning, when pump failures and improperly closed valves prevented the steam generators from removing heat produced by the chain reaction in the nuclear reactor. Removing this heat is essential to prevent reactor damage, and cooling water is pumped through the reactor and the steam generators to do so. When the cooling water stopped flowing to the steam generators, the reactor automatically shut down, just as it was designed to do in such a situation. Unfortunately, relief valves that help lower pressure in the reactor didn't close properly. Pressure continued to drop, and cooling water escaped from the reactor. Instruments that should have helped the reactor operators understand the situation provided confusing information, including false indications that the relief valves were closed. As a result, the operators did not understand why pressure was falling, and some of their subsequent actions made matters worse when they mistakenly turned off the reactor coolant pumps. The fuel began to overheat. Eventually, the nuclear fuel in the reactor overheated so much the zirconium cladding, long metal tubes that hold the nuclear fuel pellets, disintegrated and reacted with the steam to create hydrogen gas. The fuel pellets inside tumbled out and began to melt at over 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It was later determined that about half the uranium pellets melted during the early stages of the accident. The NRC dispatched a team of experts as soon as news of the accident reached authorities. Other agencies, such as the Department of Energy and the Environmental Protection Agency, also mobilized response teams. By midday, TMI's owner and the Department of Energy sampled radioactivity in the atmosphere above the plant. By evening, the operators had restored cooling to the core, and the reactor appeared stable. But within a short time, new worries emerged about the hydrogen created when the zirconium cladding reacted with the steam. A large bubble of hydrogen was lodged at the top of the pressure vessel, the steel container that holds the reactor fuel. Experts worried that the hydrogen bubble might explode, rupturing the pressure vessel and the containment building, allowing radiation to escape. The state's governor advised pregnant women and young children within a 5-mile radius of the plant to leave the area. The crisis ended when experts determined on Sunday, April 1st, that the bubble could not burn or explode because of the absence of oxygen in the pressure vessel. Today, the TMI Unit 2 reactor is permanently shut down. The reactor coolant system is drained. The radioactive water has been decontaminated and evaporated. The radioactive waste, reactor fuel, and debris from the core have been shipped off-site. In the months after the accident, thousands of environmental samples of air, water, vegetation, soil, and food were collected. Thorough assessments by respected organizations concluded the actual release of radiation was small and had negligible effects on the physical health of individuals and the environment. Nevertheless, the NRC made extensive regulatory changes. New requirements aimed at reducing human errors affected plant design, human performance standards, and fitness for duty programs. The NRC also expanded incident response staffing, emergency planning, and its resident inspector program. The vigilance of the NRC today can be directly tied to the events of 33 years ago.
Just want to clarify something. Unit 2, the unit that did have the accident, did shut down permanently. Unit 1 did reopen sometime after the accident. Going to move on now to Frank Deford, who died recently at the age of 79. One of the top sports writers in the country. Many people say he was the best. He had 2 long stints with Sports Illustrated, but he's better known for being a commentator for National Public Radio, where he did over 1,600 broadcasts. Sometimes he got a little preachy for my taste, but he was quite brilliant, and he did a wonderful segment on our Dick Kazmaier podcast about his fellow Princetonian, who was the best amateur athlete in the country in the early 50s. I urge you to listen to that. Here is NPR with a little bit of their tribute to Frank Deford.
Sports writer Frank Deford has died. His weekly Wednesday commentary was a morning edition staple for over 35 years, and before he joined NPR in 1980, he already was one of the most esteemed and decorated writers in the business. Even when it was the most run-of-the-mill story, Frank Deford was good for at least one take that you'd never heard before. Deford retired from doing commentaries earlier this month, and that was when NPR sports correspondent Tom Goldman first shared this appreciation of one of the rare voices in sports.
I am the very model of a baseball star. I hit them hard and hit them far. No, not a swimmer, nor a spinner, nor a skier, nor a point guard. Me, for I'm lean and mean and fit as a fiddle, ready to show the world my spittle, ready to show my spittle.
I am the very model of a modern major general.
When Frank came on, being outrageous, it was very much what we wanted in our commentators.
Ketzel Levine was the Morning Edition sports producer who recruited Frank in 1979 when he was one of the top writers for Sports Illustrated.
He just kind of took it in a whole different direction that no one had really taken it before.
Frank churned out 1,656 commentaries. He was given a lot of freedom with the expectation he'd be original every Wednesday, a notoriously slow sports day.
If I come on 3 days after the Super Bowl and say pretty much what everybody else has said, what's the point? That was the tricky thing, was coming up with a new angle.
Mostly, he did. He imagined Shakespeare covering the Super Bowl. He compared Babe Ruth to Winnie the Pooh. And almost always, he had a fresh, pointed take on the issue of the moment.
So I believe that the reason gay male athletes stay in the closet has far more to do with the public than with the locker room. It troubles her, she admits, that she herself lied about that, filling out boilerplate NCAA forms that affirmed that there was no cheating. But everybody does it. Just tell the NCAA what it wants and sell more tickets.
Strong opinions beget strong reactions, and Frank got his share. After Frank suggested maybe hockey should stay in Canada, former Morning Edition host Bob Edwards read from a particularly scorching letter.
If Mr. Deford were to step off a plane in Detroit, Hockey Town, under anything but an assumed name, he probably wouldn't live to find his luggage.
Yikes! Frank says it's never been his goal to alienate listeners. Rather, he wanted to show a non-sports audience that sports were closer to them than they thought.
This is part of your life, and it's the second tier. The first tier is eating, drinking, and procreation. The second tier is religion, the spirit, music, art, and the physical, sports. It deserves to have as much attention paid to it, seriously. And the number of letters that I have gotten through the years saying, I never really cared for sports, but I like listening to you because you bring something new to it. I'm sort of proud of that. I am proud of that.
My favorite thing about Frank Deford was in 1990 he put together an all-sports daily called The National, and it was really great. He had the best sports writers in the country, but it suffered from distribution problems and advertising problems, and it folded quickly. Finally, Frank Deford talked bravely about his daughter, Alex, who died at 8 years old from cystic fibrosis. For much of his life, he worked tirelessly for funding and research for CF.
Hi, I'm Frank Deford, Chairman Emeritus of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. More importantly, the father of the little girl who died of cystic fibrosis. Alex was 8 years old when she died in 1980, and at that time, that was just about the life expectancy of someone with cystic fibrosis, 8 or 10 years old. Today, that life expectancy is 37 years. So you can see that we've added a year of life for everyone with cystic fibrosis for every year that has passed. And not only that, we have greatly enhanced the quality of life of everyone with cystic fibrosis. Still, CF is such a damnable disease. It's so agonizing, so painful, so debilitating. In fact, I don't think I ever properly understood what my daughter meant to me until about 3 or 4 years after her death, when I wrote a book about her, Alex, The Life of a Child. I was at a book and author luncheon in Cleveland after the book came out, and after I spoke about Alex, I came back to my seat, and the next speaker had already moved to the podium, Gloria Steinem, the feminist author, and she had left behind a note for me, quickly scribbled. "Dear Frank," was all it said. "Thank you for telling us that even a little 8-year-old girl can be a hero." And Gloria was right. My child was a hero to me. For all Alex suffered, for all she endured, and for how she triumphed in the spirit, she was truly a hero. All people with cystic fibrosis possess such courage and such nobility. They should be our heroes.
Well, I hate to segue from there to our last subject, Manuel Noriega, who died recently at the age of 83. He was a Panamanian dictator, a drug dealer, CIA informant, all-around bad guy, but he was big news in the late 1980s, and here's an NBC report on it.
Noriega seized power back in 1983 by sheer force of his personality, promoting himself to general of the armed forces. And during his reign of power, he was the source of valuable intelligence to the U.S., but also of tremendous deceit. He routinely tipped off the U.S. to important details about Central American and Caribbean adversaries such as Cuba, but then played the other side. He provided Cuban dictator Fidel Castro with thousands of Panamanian passports, charging $5,000 for each of them, allowing Cuban spies to operate as Panamanian citizens. In 1989, Noriega, who held control of the Panama Canal, became too dangerous for then-President George H.W. Bush. If Noriega's ruthless torture and murder of political opponents and his role in facilitating cocaine shipments to the U.S. didn't raise enough red flags, the murder of an American soldier, the wounding of a second, and the beating of a third in Panama forced President Bush's hands. Bush ordered 27,000 American troops to invade Panama in December of 1989. While Noriega's troops were quickly overwhelmed, 23 U.S. soldiers were killed, more than 300 wounded, before Noriega was apprehended and brought to the U.S. to serve time in prison. In his last years, he asked to be judged by the same level of treachery as his captors, but he also asked for forgiveness.
That's enough on him. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. During the American invasion, Noriega hid out in the Vatican embassy, and we finally got him out of there in a PSYOPs effort by blaring loud music, including this song written by Hoyt Axton and performed by John Kay and Steppenwolf, The Pusher.
God damn! The Pusher! Say the pusher.